Hi, 8th graders. So this week's focus is going to be on value. Value refers to the light and dark parts of an artwork. So all we're going to use this week is a pencil, a thin marker, and an eraser to create this project. So let's get started. The materials that we're using for this project are going to be a thin marker. If you don't have a marker, you can always use a pen or even like a black crayon, but it's going to help when you're drawing the different holes. And then a pencil and an eraser. Now, if you have actual drawing pencils, I wanted to go over them really quick. I'm going to be doing the drawing with just one pencil because I feel like that's what most of you will have. But what we're going to do, if you have the fancy drawing pencils, we're going to look at the numbers really quick. So if you have a pencil that has an H and a number, that's going to be your sketching pencil. That means it has a hard lead, and so when you shade with it, no matter how hard you press, it's still pretty light. Now, starting with a darker color, you look for one that says HB. So it's still a little hard, but the lead is starting to get a little bit softer so that it is a little darker when you're coloring with it. Now, for darker or even darker shades, you'll see that there are pencils labeled with a B and then a number in front of it. The higher the number, the darker the pencil is going to be. So this is a 3B. So you can see it's darker than the HB. And this one here is a 5B. So if you do have these type of drawing pencils, you definitely can use them to shade. However, if all you have is a regular pencil, you can do the same thing. You just have to change the pressure. So like to get darker, you need to press harder and harder. So let's get started with this project. It is a little complicated, but if we break it down into steps, it won't be too hard. But what we're going to do is we're going to shade layer by layer so it doesn't get too confusing for us. So we're going to start by drawing pretty large, like organic shapes. They're not perfectly circular. They're kind of just little holes in the paper that we're creating. And I'm keeping them pretty big, but I'm leaving a thin space in between. And I'm going to vary the shapes just a little bit. And that is our first step, okay? And then I'm going to trace it with my thin marker. So now that I've traced it, we're going to work on our second layer. This we're gonna leave white so we don't have to worry about any shading yet. So the next step is I'm gonna draw inside these shapes other like holes or circles or ovals, whatever shapes you wanna call them. So I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna continue this big one over here. Notice that I'm skipping the space where the line goes over it. That's why I had you guys trace a marker so we could see the difference. All right, I'm going to add another one. Over here. And then one here. Okay, so then I want you to trace your lines again. Okay, now that I've finished tracing with the marker, my second layer, I'm actually going to start shading. So this is only our second layer. So actually I just noticed I need to draw probably one more shape over here just to fill up the space. Okay, so we are not shading the holes, we're shading the extra stuff around, and it's going to be a pretty light shading because it's only our second layer, so we want it slightly darker than this. So I'm gonna gently shade, and I'm actually gonna smudge a little too as I do it. And I'm shading a little darker where this part would overlap. All right, and I'm gonna shade here a little bit darker. And if you ever go too dark, it's okay. You can just erase a little. Like, I felt like I went a little dark here, so I'm going to go over with eraser, and then I'll add a little more in. So I'm going to go around and shade all of this. Okay, so I have finished shading. The second layer, you can see that it's just lightly shaded because we're going to add a couple more layers underneath and it's going to get darker and darker. I also added a little bit more of shadow just around the areas where I felt like it looked like it was overlapping. So then I added it a little darker just to show a little bit more depth. So we're going to do the same thing where we're drawing different holes in the different sections for our next layer. So I'm going to come over here and sketch out here. And as I'm doing it, I'm still trying to take up as much space as possible with the shapes. But as I'm going, the shapes are definitely getting smaller and smaller. Okay, and then I'm going to trace it with my thin black marker again. All right, now that I've finished tracing with the marker, I'm going to go in and start shading again, everything except like the cutouts. Now, we have to shade a little bit darker than this layer so that it looks like it's underneath. I'm gonna start, but we still want to be able to shade a little bit darker after this because we're gonna do another layer. So you just wanna make sure it looks darker than this layer here. All right, once you're done shading, we're gonna do one last layer. So I'm going to do the same thing where I'm sketching the shapes. I'm gonna come all the way over here with this shape. And then I'm really trying to layer the shapes underneath now. And you can see these shapes are much smaller. Okay, it looks like I have everything pretty much covered, and then I'm gonna trace with marker. And after you've traced, you're now going to shade around the cutouts again. And this time we want to go darker than the latest layers. So I got to make sure that this looks like it's darker so it looks like it's going down into space. Okay, so we're going to do that. next. Okay, so now I've finished up with shading the last part. If you wanted to, honestly, you could continue going with this and get darker and darker. It's just harder to like get all those different shades darker. So the last step is we're actually gonna color in these shapes pretty darkly. I colored pretty dark the last time with this pencil, so I'm actually going to switch to one of my shading pencils, a 5B. I know that a lot of you may not have this, so you can actually color this with like a black crayon or even go in with a Sharpie marker to make it pretty dark. So we're going to start coloring these darker for the last step. Okay, so once I was finished with shading the darkest holes, I just went back in with an eraser and kind of removed some of, as I was like shading and stuff, I smudged over the top layer, and that you want to be like the brightest. So I'm going in with an eraser and just making it look a little bit brighter. And after that, we are done. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys value projects. Bye.